Part 1. The History of the Mexica Rulers. Folios 1R to 18R. Folio 1 Recto. Opening and Founding of Tenochtitlan. In the upper margin, 2 annotations were added by later owners. A. Tevet, 1553. The ownership signature and date of André Tevet, the French royal cosmographer, into whose hands the Codex fell after French privateers captured the ship carrying it to Spain, and a Latin note referencing the manuscript's intended recipient, Emperor Charles V, to King Charles V. Here begins the history and founding of this city of Mexico, founded and settled by the Mexica, who at that time called themselves Mecitan, whose origin, their rise to become lords, and their deeds and lives are briefly and summarily set down in this history, according to what is successively depicted by the paintings and figures. In the year 1324, after the coming of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the Mexica arrived at the site of the city of Mexico. And as the space and setting suited them, after many years of wandering on their journey from land to land, and in some of these places having made settlements for a number of years, having set out from a distant land, in the course of their journey, not having been satisfied with the settlements they had made, they arrived at the place of Mexico. At that time it was entirely flooded with water, with great thickets of cattail reeds called tule, and large reed beds like forests. Throughout the whole space of the site there was a clearing of clean water, free of thickets and reeds, and this clearing was shaped like a St. Andrew's cross, just as it is depicted to show. And almost at the very center of that space and clearing, the Mexica found a great stone, upon a flowering crag, atop a great cactus, where a mighty eagle had its dwelling and feeding ground. For that space was found scattered with the bones of birds and many feathers of different colors. And having walked and surveyed the whole site, and finding it fertile and abundant with game birds, fish, and shellfish, with which to sustain themselves and to trade profitably among the neighboring towns, and on account of the waters, they resolved in their pilgrimage to go no further. And for other established reasons and causes, they fortified themselves near the waters, sheltered within the tule reeds and canebrakes. And there the origin and founding of their settlement was determined. They named and gave the place its title, calling it Tenochtitlan, by reason and cause of the cactus, tunal, that grew upon the stone. Tenochtitlan, translated into Castilian, means cactus upon a stone. The Mexica host brought as their leaders 10 named persons: Ocelipan, Quapan, Acamapichtli, Ahuitzotl, Xochimitl, Tenoch, Tequinoa, Xocoyol. Note, 3 of these 10 founding leaders' names are difficult to decipher. Names remain marked ? Pending a higher resolution recheck. See open items in the status section at the end of this document. Folio 1 Verso. The year count and the new fire ceremony. The lower third of this folio carries a horizontal band of small square yearglyphs painted in blue-green, each accompanied by a Nahuatl calendrical name written in red ink above it. A run of the 4 year-bearer signs: Toctli, rabbit; Acatl, reed; Tecpatl, flint; Cali, house, each prefixed with a numeral coefficient and a Spanish ordinal number below it: 11, 12, 13. This is the manuscript's running count of the years of Mexica rulership referenced in the prose above it. A full glyph-by-glyph transliteration of the band remains an open item, a term tentatively transcribed as Tenazmcoem, uncertain, which likewise appears, and is shown by what is depicted, which took place in the course of the lordship of Tenochtitlan. It lasted 59 years, and at the end of them, the ruler died. And what is depicted in blue in the margins of this history, each little square or division signifies 1 year, and together they are the count of years that the lords of Mexico held power. And so that it may be openly and clearly understood, the depiction and count and names of the years is such that upon reaching 13 points, i.e. 13 numbered yearglyphs, the count returns to the first sign, beginning again until reaching 13 points once more. Further down the page, describing a ritual tied to the end of a calendar cycle. They made great sacrifices and ceremonies to their gods, and they gave themselves over to penance and abstained from all wrongdoing, so that when the proper day and hour arrived, on that day they generally extinguished all lights and fires until the day had passed, and once it had passed, they lit a new fire, brought down from a mountain, drawn forth by their priest. Note, this passage describes what modern scholarship identifies as the Toxiumolpilia, or New Fire Ceremony, marking the completion of a 52-year calendar round, though the manuscript's own vocabulary here, tentatively transcribed as Talamo, does not use that term. This identification is an editorial note, not part of the original text, and is flagged for verification against the pictorial register on this folio. Folio 2 Recto, the founding scene, full-page pictorial. This folio is the manuscript's most celebrated image, a full-page depiction of the eagle on the cactus at the center of the lake, framed by a blue-green X, the St. Andrew's Cross, of clear water described in the text on Fol 1R. In each of the 4 triangular fields formed by the X sit the 10 founding leaders of the Mexica, each rendered in the standard seated elder convention with a name label on their cloak. Below the cactus, a shield crossed with darts marks the site as a place of conquest and war. The entire scene is bordered by the blue year count band, continuing the tally introduced on Fol 1V. Below the founding scene, 2 smaller vignettes show the first 2 conquests of the new city. In each, a Mexica warrior holds a captive by the hair, while a burning toppled temple glyph, the standard pictographic sign for military conquest, identifies the defeated town, Colhuacan and Tenayuca. Upper margin added later in Andre Thievit's hand, A. Thievit, cosmographer to the king, with a partial note referencing the year count beside it. Founding leaders' names confirmed from this pass: Acacapitli, Guapan, Quapan, the scribe's Gu for Q is a common 16th century spelling variant, and Osalopan, partially legible. Remaining names are present around the figure, but require a further high-resolution pass to confirm with confidence. Open item. Interpretation. This page functions as the pictorial counterpart to the prose narrative on Fol 1R. Rather than additional running text, it is the founding story rendered in the manuscript's visual system, with the 10 named leaders standing in for the collective act of settlement, and the 2 conquest vignettes establishing the pattern, repeated for the next several folios, of one ruler's reign per page, told through captured towns and their toppled temple glyphs. Folio 2 Verso, Acamapichtli, first ruler of Tenochtitlan. This folio begins the manuscript's ruler-by-ruler format that continues through Fol 18R, a seated figure of the ruler, labeled by name, paired with the town glyphs he conquered during his reign, a continuing blue year count band, and severed head glyphs marking captives taken in war. Acamapichtli, traditionally regarded as the first Tlatoani, ruler of Tenochtitlan, appears twice on this page, a convention the manuscript explains explicitly on Fol 3R. The first image marks the start of his reign, the second marks the point at which he began his conquests. The 4 towns depicted and named on this page, Cuauhnahuac, Mixquic, Cuitlahuac, and Xochimilco, are those which Acamapichtli conquered by force of arms during the time that he was Lord of Mexico. The 4 heads shown above signify those who were captured in the wars against the 4 towns, whose heads were cut off. A running total closes the year count band for this ruler, number of years 21. Folio 3 Recto, Acamapichtli's reign, legacy, and death, with scribal corrections. In the year 1377, in that lordship, the succession of Acamapichtli began, and during his reign by force of arms, he won and conquered the towns shown in the paintings and named in them, which are Cuauhnahuac, Mixquic, Cuitlahuac, and Xochimilco, which became tributaries, entering into vassalage. During the years that the said Lord Acamapichtli governed, his practice and inclination was to keep many wives and daughters of all the leading men of Mexico, by whom he had many sons, who became the origin from which many caciques and captains, a warlike people, multiplied. Through them the city of Mexico came to grow and expand into great power, as will be shown successively in what follows, through what is depicted with its clarifications. The 2 figures bearing the title and name of Acamapichtli are one and the same person, represented at different points in time. The first figure shows the beginning of his succession to that lordship, and the second shows the year after he succeeded to it, when he began to conquer and subject the 4 towns named above. That lordship lasted in duration, 20 some number, corrected in the manuscript, years, at the end of which the said Acamapichtli died and passed from this present life, and this took place in the year 1398. Scribal correction note, unique to this folio. This folio preserves the scribe's own correction apparatus, visible directly on the page. This correction is valid. Where it reads 5, disregard it. The marginal note above, reading 77, is the valid one. Likewise valid. Where it reads 28, disregard it. The interlinear note reading 98 years is the valid one. Per the correction, the reign is dated from approximately 1377, ending with his death in approximately 1398. See the chronology check under full 5R below for how this figure holds up against later corrections. Folio 3 verso, Huitzilihuitl, second ruler of Tenochtitlan. Following the established format, this folio presents the second ruler of Tenochtitlan, Huitzilihuitl, rendered by the scribe as Huitzilihuitl, together with 8 town glyphs marking the settlements conquered during his reign, twice the number shown for his predecessor Acamapichtli, and the continuing blue year count band. The 8 conquered towns named on this folio are Tlatelolco, Itzcoatl, Chalco, a town whose label is only partly legible in this pass, tentatively Tulancingo open item, Saltacan, Otumpan, Otumba, Acolma, Acolman, and Tezcuco, the last marked differently from the others, as a seat of lordship, rather than a plain town. The caption beside the shield and arrows icon reads more legibly here than on full 2V, and corrects an earlier tentative reading. It is a standard formula. This device of the shield and arrows signifies the conquests of the towns depicted and named above, repeated on each ruler's page, not a numbered tribute count as previously guessed for full 2V. The year count band again closes with number of years 21, matching the tally recorded for Acamapichtli. Interpretation: the doubling of conquered towns shown for Huitzilihuitl, 8 versus 4 for Acamapichtli, while the year count remains the same, 21 years, suggests either an intensified campaign of expansion under the second ruler, or simply a fuller pictorial record for this reign. Texcoco's appearance here, marked differently from the other towns, is also notable. Texcoco was the seat of the Acahua and would become Tenochtitlan's principal partner in the Triple Alliance, so its inclusion in a conquest list this early in the dynasty is worth flagging for cross-reference against other primary sources. Folio 4 recto, Huitzilihuitl's reign in prose, with cross-referencing correction. In the year 1398, in that lordship, Huitzilihuitl succeeded, son of Acamapichtli, and in the course of his reign, by force of arms, he won and conquered 8 towns, which are those shown in the paintings on the preceding page, whose names are given there, and which became tributaries to the Mexica lordship, acknowledging vassalage. Huitzilihuitl was warlike in battle, and inclined to keep many wives, by whom he had many children, through which the numbers of the Mexica continued to grow. The course of the lordship and life of Huitzilihuitl was 21 years, at the end of which he died and passed from this present life, as is recorded in the figures of the little blue squares. A scribal correction on this folio confirms the valid death date figure as 98, i.e. 1398, striking through an earlier 26. Note: this correction cross-references directly with the correction on full 3R, recording Acamapichtli's death as occurring in 1398. Read together, the 2 folios' corrected dates are internally consistent. Acamapichtli died in 1398, and Huitzilihuitl succeeded him that same year. Folio 4 verso, Chimalpopoca, third ruler and the Chalco conflict. This folio breaks from the pattern of the previous 3. Only 2 conquered towns are shown, a marked drop from Huitzilihuitl's 8, Tequixquiac and Chalco, and a substantial new scene occupies the lower half of the page. A man smashing canoes with a stone, above a row of 5 severed heads and 3 empty canoes. The ruler is labeled Chimalpopoca. The caption beside the figure smashing canoes explains, "This figure signifies the natives of the town of Chalco who rebelled against the Mexica, depicted here breaking their 4 canoes with the stone he holds in his hands." The caption beside the row of severed heads reads, "These heads signify 5 Mexica persons who were killed by the people of Chalco." Interpretation: this is a materially different kind of entry from the previous 3 rulers' pages. Rather than a one-sided list of towns conquered, Full 4V records an actual armed conflict with named casualties on the Mexica side. A rebellion by Chalco against Tenochtitlan, the destruction of Mexica canoes, and the deaths of 5 Mexica men. This is consistent with the wider historical record of persistent hostility between Tenochtitlan and Chalco throughout the early 15th century. This manuscript's own text, as transcribed here, does not go on to state the ruler's own cause of death explicitly. See Full 5R, which confirms he died of unstated causes after a 10-year reign. Folio 5 Recto, Chimalpopoca's reign in prose, and the Chalco Rebellion clarified. In the year 1417, in the lordship of Mexico, upon the death of Huitzilihuitl, Chimalpopoca succeeded to that lordship. Chimalpopoca was the son of Huitzilihuitl, and during his reign he subjected by force of arms the towns of Tequixquiac and Chalco, and having rendered vassalage, they paid tribute to the lordship of Mexico, as is shown in the paintings on the preceding page. And while holding these towns thus subject, the town of Chalco, after some 4 years of vassalage, rebelled against the Mexica, and from their rebellion harm came to the Mexica, in that they killed 5 men and broke 4 canoes, as is shown above in the paintings with their explanations. The course of the life and lordship of Chimalpopoca was 10 years, at the end of which he died, as is numbered in the painting of the little blue squares in the margin. Likewise, Chimalpopoca, in the course of his reign, had many wives and children, for this was held to be a mark of greatness. A scribal correction on this folio confirms the valid succession year figure as 17, i.e. 1417, striking through an earlier 47. Chronology check. This folio clarifies folio 4V's pictorial scene. It was the people of Chalco in rebellion who broke the Mexica canoes and killed the 5 Mexica men, not the reverse. The corrected succession year 1417 is also internally consistent with the chronology established across Fulls 3R-4R. Acamapichtli died 1398. Huitzilihuitl succeeded that year and reigned 21 years, 1398 plus 21, approximately 1419, closely matching Chimalpopoca's corrected succession date of 1417. This cross-folio arithmetic check is worth preserving in the encyclopedia's citation notes as evidence the corrected dates, taken together, are internally coherent. 3 independent scribal corrections on 3 different folios agree with each other. Folio 5 Verso, Itzcoatl, 4th ruler and the defeat of Azcapotzalco. The ruler's name label reads Itzcoatl. This folio shows by far the largest number of conquered towns of any ruler so far, 11, more than the previous 3 rulers combined, consistent with Itzcoatl's historical significance as the ruler under whom Tenochtitlan broke the dominance of Azcapotzalco, and together with Texcoco and Tlacopan, formed what is known to history as the Triple Alliance. The 11 towns named on this folio are Azcapotzalco and Coyoacan, both confirmed at high resolution, followed by Teocalhuacan, partially legible, Cuauhnacan, tentative, Tlacopan, Atlacuayoayan, Mixcoc, Cuauhximalpan, Cuauhitlan, Tecpan, tentative, and Acalhuacan. The caption beside the shield and arrows icon repeats the standard formula seen on earlier folios. This shield and arrows signify the instruments of war with which the towns depicted on these pages and named in their figures were won. Interpretation. The presence of Azcapotzalco and Tlacopan on this list is especially significant. Azcapotzalco was the dominant Tepanec power that Tenochtitlan had previously been subordinate to. Its conquest under Itzcoatl marks the historical turning point traditionally credited with establishing Tenochtitlan's independence and beginning its rise to imperial power. Tlacopan's appearance in a conquest list is more surprising, since Tlacopan became one of Tenochtitlan's two partners in the Triple Alliance rather than a subject town. This is worth flagging for careful cross-reference against other primary sources, since the relationship between conquest and alliance in this period was not always a clean either-or in the way later colonial summaries sometimes present it. Folio 6 Recto, Itzcoatl's reign continued, reconquest of the lake towns and Tlatelolco. This folio continues Itzcoatl's conquest list from Fol 5v, with at least 13 further towns, the largest single-page total in the manuscript so far. The top row is clearly legible: Mizquic, Cuitlahuac, Xochimilco, and Chalco. The same four lake towns first conquered under Acamapichtli, Fol 2v, and in Chalco's case, the town whose rebellion against Chimalpopoca was recorded on Fols 4v to 5r. Their reappearance here indicates a reconquest or resubjugation under Itzcoatl rather than a first conquest. Worth noting as a continuity thread across four separate folios and three rulers' reigns. A named ruler figure, distinct from the plain town glyphs used elsewhere on the page, appears in the second row, labeled Cuauhtlatoani, Señor de Tlatelolco. Cuauhtlatoani, Lord of Tlatelolco. Tlatelolco was Tenochtitlan's sister city on the same island, with its own ruling line. Its inclusion here, represented by its ruler rather than a generic town glyph, is a distinction worth preserving precisely, rather than flattening into the same category as the other conquered towns. The remaining town labels on this folio, in the lower rows, are less certain at the resolution reviewed so far, and are flagged as an open item for a higher resolution follow-up pass. Rather than transcribed here with confidence they do not yet merit. Folio 6 Verso, Itzcoatl's reign in prose, 24 towns and the defeat of Azcapotzalco. In the year 1427, in the lordship of Mexico, upon the death of Chimalpopoca, Itzcoatl succeeded to that lordship, identified here as a son of Acamapichtli, the earlier lord of Mexico. During his reign he conquered by force of arms 24 towns, which are depicted on the preceding pages. These were of great importance to the lordship of Mexico, for Itzcoatl was ardent and warlike in arms, and a man of very great ingenuity, well known for many things, through which with his effective strategies he subdued the towns, which paid him tribute, acknowledging vassalage. Itzcoatl had many wives, by whom he had 7 sons and daughters. He held the lordship for a span of 13 years, at the end of which he died and passed from this present life. A scribal correction on this folio confirms the number of children as 7, striking through an earlier 9. Chronology check. The 24 towns figure stated here matches exactly the count across Fols 5v and 6r, 11 towns on 5v, 13 on 6r, confirming both folios were read completely and correctly as a set. The succession year, 1427, is also consistent with the chronology built up over the preceding folios. Chimalpopoca succeeded in 1417 and reigned 10 years, 1417 plus 10 equals 1427, landing exactly on Itzcoatl's stated succession date. This is the 4th consecutive ruler transition where the manuscript's internal arithmetic holds together. Itzcoatl's own 13-year reign, if the pattern continues, predicts the next ruler's succession around 1440. Note: this folio's prose does not explicitly narrate the Azcapotzalco War, or the formation of the Triple Alliance in the detail outside historical sources describe. It names Itzcoatl's conquests only in aggregate, 24 towns, and by reputation, ardent and warlike, a man of very great ingenuity. The specific narrative of the Azcapotzalco conflict, if told in more detail, was not found on this folio and should not be assumed present in the manuscript without further checking later folios. The remainder of this folio, below the prose block, appears to be blank or carries only faint, undeveloped pencil or ink sketch marks, not a finished pictorial register. This is noted for completeness rather than left unexplained. Folio 7 recto, blank leaf, offset impression only. This leaf carries no independently inked content. What is visible under contrast enhancement is a faint mirror image offset of the pigment from folio 7 verso, the facing page, which has bled through the thin manuscript paper over 5 centuries. There is no original text or painting on folio 7 recto itself. This is noted here for completeness, rather than left as an unexplained gap in the sequence. Folio 7 verso, Huitzilihuitl, Moctezuma I, 5th ruler of Tenochtitlan. The ruler's name label reads Huitzilihuitl, Moctezuma the Elder, distinguishing this ruler from his great-grandson Moctezuma II, who would later meet Cortés. Historically known as Moctezuma I Ilhuacamina, this ruler is credited with major territorial expansion beyond the Valley of Mexico. The standard instruments of war, shield and arrows caption, appears again beside his figure, and the blue year count band continues down the left margin. Confirmed town labels on this folio include Coaxtlahuaca, Malinaltepec tentative, Tenanco, Teteutepec, Chiconquiauco, Xihutepec, Totolapan, Chalco, a third appearance of this town across the manuscript, following folios 2 verso and 6 recto. Quahunahuac, likewise a repeat, following folios 2 verso and 6 recto, Tlatelolco and Huaxtepec, 11 towns in total on this folio. Folio 8 recto, Moctezuma I's conquests continued. This folio continues the conquest list with approximately 22 further town glyphs across 6 rows, the densest single page of town glyphs in the manuscript so far. Legible labels include Yalhatepec, Tepoztlan, Acamapichtli, Yoaltepec, Tlaco, Tlacozautitlan, Tepecuaquilco, Quialhatepan, Chantalcotalan, Huitzcoatl, Tlatelolco, Itzcoatl tentative, Tulan, Xilotepec tentative, Tlatelolco, a second distinct instance from the one earlier in this row, Tlapacoyan, Chapolixitlan, Tlaquiahutepec tentative, Quetlaxtlan, and Cuauhtoco. Precise readings of several of these labels remain open items pending a further high-resolution pass, given the density of text on this page. The count and general place name forms are recorded here as a first pass. Folio 8 verso, Moctezuma I's reign in prose, 33 towns and a character portrait. In the year 1440, in the lordship of Mexico, upon the death of Itzcoatl, Moctezuma succeeded to that lordship, identified here as a son of Huitzilihuitl, the earlier lord of Mexico, making him a nephew, not a son of his immediate predecessor Itzcoatl. During his reign he conquered and won by force of arms 33 towns, as depicted on the preceding pages, all shown beneath the figure of the great Moctezuma, so that it be known they paid tribute to the lordship of Mexico, acknowledging great vassalage. This great Moctezuma was a very great and sensible lord, given to virtue, and was a man of good nature and an enemy of frivolous wrongs. Out of his good disposition, he established order in the laws of the republic among all his vassals. Whenever he learned of transgressions, he appointed enforcers for them, such that few laws were broken. Yet he was not cruel. Rather, he was zealous for the good governance of his vassals. He was not given to excess with women, and had few children. He was very moderate in drinking, and governed the judgment of his vassals so well that they did not deceive him for 20 years. The text continues with an observation about drinking specifically. It states that native peoples in general were, in the scribe's characterization, inclined in the extreme toward drunkenness, and that Moctezuma had those who behaved this way corrected and punished. Through his generosity and good example, his rule was held in high regard and respected by his vassals for the whole course of his lordship, which was 29 years, at the end of which he died and passed from this present life. Note: the generalization about native peoples and drunkenness is a colonial-era Spanish stereotype embedded directly in the primary source, not an observation unique to Moctezuma's court. It is translated here faithfully, without softening, because the encyclopedia's standard is to preserve exactly what a document says and let readers draw their own conclusions about the colonial gaze producing it. consistent with treating the Codex as a document authored by a Spanish cleric working from indigenous informants for a specific colonial audience, Charles V., rather than as a neutral ethnographic record. Chronology check. Moctezuma's stated succession year, 1440, lands exactly on the prediction from Itzcoatl's corrected 1427 succession, plus his stated 13-year reign, 1427 plus 13, is 1440. A fifth consecutive ruler transition, confirmed by the manuscript's own figures. His own 29-year reign predicts the next succession around 1469, a date that can be checked against the historical records commonly cited 1469 death date for Moctezuma I Ilhuicamina. An external cross-check worth noting, though outside this primary source itself. Folio 9 recto, blank leaf, offset impression only. Like Fol 7R, this leaf carries no independently inked content, only a faint offset impression of pigment bled through from the facing page, Fol 9V. A small circular Bodleian Library ownership stamp is visible near the center. The manuscript's convention on subsequent folios makes clear that blank rectos of this kind are structural, marking the opening of a new ruler's section on the facing verso, rather than pages of content that have been lost or effaced. Folio 9 verso, Axayacatl, 6th ruler of Tenochtitlan, and the war against Tlatelolco in the year 1469 per an interlinear correction. In the lordship of Mexico, upon the death of Huehue Moctezuma, Axayacatl succeeded to that lordship. A son of Tezcocamochtli, Tezozomoc, the reference is likely to Axayacatl's paternal descent through the ruling line, not to the earlier Tepanec ruler of the same name, and Lord of Mexico. During the time of his reign, he conquered by force of arms 37 towns, as depicted and named successively on the following pages. Among the towns which he subdued and placed under his lordship by force of arms, the town of Tlatelolco was of much significance. The lord of Tlatelolco at that time was Moquiwix, a proud and prominent person, of great rank, and by his nature arrogant from the beginning. He was related to the Lord of Mexico through kinship. Because of wars that had been fought between them in earlier times, they had frequent battles, the outcome of which was that the said Moquiwix, Lord of Tlatelolco, died by throwing himself from a great height on account of having been defeated in the battle. Being vanquished, he entered into the temple of Tlatelolco, thinking to escape being taken. And holding him for a priest of the temple within the mosque itself, his pursuers hurled him down, as is depicted. From that time, the Mexica came out victorious, and from that day forward, the lordship of Tlatelolco lasted until the Spanish conquistadors conquered Mexico. They were vassals of the Lord of Mexico, paying him tribute and acknowledging vassalage. Axayacatl was very brave and warlike in war, and was given to women with great excess, having many wives and children. He was haughty and turbulent, bullicioso, such that all his vassals feared him. In this way he sustained and approved as good the laws and customs of his predecessor Moctezuma, as recorded in that history. His reign lasted 12 years, at the end of which he died, and passed from this present life. Note: this is the primary source's own account of the 1473 Tenochtitlan-Tlatelolco War, the pivotal conflict in which the sister city on the same island was folded into Tenochtitlan's direct rule. Moquiwix's death by fall from the Tlatelolco temple is depicted directly on the facing folio 10 recto, an unusually specific and dramatic image within the otherwise formal conquest list format, making this one of the most vivid narrative moments in the Codex. Folio 10 recto, Axayacatl's conquests, the death of Moquiwix at Tlatelolco. This folio pairs the seated figure of Axayacatl, Axayacatl honorific form, with a striking upper scene, the twin shrine temple of Tlatelolco, labeled Tlatelolco Pueblo with the figure of its defeated lord, Moquiwix, captioned Moquiwix Señor, Cabeza de Tlatelolco. Moquiwix Lord, head of Tlatelolco. Falling headfirst from the temple platform, his shield and quetzal feather headdress tumble beside him. This is the pictorial counterpart to the prose account on folio 9 verso. The remainder of the folio shows conquered town glyphs. The standard instruments of war, shield and arrows caption appears again beside the ruler. here spelled Instrumentos de Guerra, a mildly variant orthography of instrumentos. Confirmed town labels include Tlatelolco, Tlatelolco, Metepec, Capuluac, Tlacotepec, tentative, Ocoyacac, Qualpanoayan, tentative, Xochiacan, Teotenanco, Calimayan, and Zinacantepec. The blue year count band runs down the left margin with a running total labeled Number of Years 12, matching the reign length stated on folio 9 verso. The Mocoic scene departs from the Codex's otherwise standard, toppled temple plus captive by hair convention. Here the defeated ruler is shown personally, by name, in the act of dying. This deserves flagging in the encyclopedia as one of the very few individual named ruler death depictions in the manuscript's historical section, comparable in specificity to the Chalco rebellion scene on folio 4v, and worth citing precisely rather than folding into a general conquest of Tlatelolco summary. Folio 10 verso, Axayacatl's conquests continued. This folio continues Axayacatl's conquest list with approximately 25 further town glyphs across 6 rows, matching in density folio 8R's Moctezuma I page. Legible top row labels include Tulucan, Toluca, Xiquipilco, Tenancinco, and Tepeyacac. Legible town labels across the remaining rows include Tlaximaloyan, Ostoma, Xocotitlan, Oquilan, Ostoticpac, Matlatlan, Quetzcomatliahuac, tentative, Tecalco, Cuetlaxtlan, Poxcalclan, tentative, Ahuitzotl, Tlaolan, Niquetlan, Quetzalcostoc, tentative, Tetzapotitlan, Miquietlan, tentative, Tamuac, Tampico region, tentative, Tampatel, tentative, Tochpan, Tenochtitlan, tentative, and Cuautlan. Together with full 10R, this brings the depicted total for Axayacatl's reign to the 37 towns stated in the full 9v prose. When the pictorial totals across both folios are added and Tlatelolco is counted, the arithmetic matches. Several individual town labels are first-pass readings and remain open items for a higher resolution confirmation pass, given the density of text. Folio 11 recto, blank leaf, offset impression only. As with full 7R and 9R, this leaf carries no independently inked content, only a faint offset impression from the facing page. The pattern is now confirmed as structural. Each new ruler section beginning with Moctezuma I opens with a blank recto, followed by a prose introduction on the verso. Folio 11 verso, Tizoc, 7th ruler of Tenochtitlan, in the year 1482, in the lordship of Mexico, upon the death of Axayacatl, Tizoc succeeded to that lordship, identified here as a son of Axayacatl. During the time of his reign, he conquered by force of arms 14 towns, as successively depicted and named on the following pages. The said Tizoc was extremely brave and warlike in arms and battles. Before he came to that lordship, he distinguished himself personally in wars, doing valorous deeds of great worth, through which he came to attain the title of Tlacatecatl, a rank of great quality and standing, before ascending to the lordship. His succession to that lordship, the same which his ancestors, Acamapichtli and his father Axayacatl, had held, the same title and rank, through which they came to be lords of Mexico. The said Tizoc, by authority and rank of the lordship, had many wives and children, in whom he had issue, and he was a man of great character in his commands, and was feared and respected by his vassals. He was likewise applied and inclined to good and virtuous things, and to the good governance of the republic. He commanded that they observe and approve as valid the laws and customs which his predecessors had established and maintained since the time of Moctezuma I. He was zealous in punishing bad customs and offenses among his vassals, and in the same way governed the Republic of Mexico in a well-ordered manner throughout the time of his life. The course of his lordship lasted a number of years, at the end of which he died and passed from this present life. A scribal correction confirms the phrase dos, 2, as valid, though the specific corrected reign length figure is not fully legible in this pass and is flagged as an open item. Note, the manuscript's naming of Tizoc as a son of Axayacatl differs from the most common outside historical account, which identifies Tizoc as Axayacatl's brother rather than his son. Both were sons of Tizoc, an earlier prince of the ruling house. This is worth flagging clearly in the encyclopedia. The primary source itself says son, which should be cited faithfully. Any harmonization with other sources belongs in the interpretive apparatus, not in the transcription. Also worth flagging. This folio records Tizoc's earlier military rank of Axayacatl before his elevation to the lordship, a specific institutional detail. The Axayacatl was one of the two highest Mexican military commands, alongside the Tenochtitlan. This is one of the Codex's most concrete pieces of evidence for how the ruling office was recruited from the senior military ranks. Folio 12 Recto, Tizoc's pictorial conquest page. The seated figure at center left is Tizoc, name labeled Tizocicatl in the standard honorific form. The shield and arrows conquest device sits opposite him, with the customary caption identifying it as instruments of war that signify the conquests of the towns depicted around him. The year count band along the left margin closes with the notation number of years 6, Arabic numeral 6, rather than the Roman numeral XXI or XII seen on earlier folios. The shortest reign of any ruler shown so far. 14 conquered town glyphs are shown across 5 rows, matching the count of 14 stated in the full 11V prose introduction. Legible top-row labels include Tlatelolco, tentative, Toxico, Ecatepec, and Ceylon. Middle row and lower row labels include Tecoxic, Tolucan, Toluca, a repeat conquest, previously appearing under Axayacatl on full 10V, Yanquitlan, Tlapan, Atezcahuacan, Macatlan, Xochietla, Tonalinoquetzayan, Ecatepec Yatpakechco, tentative, and Niquetlan. As with other dense pictorial pages, several readings remain first pass and are flagged as open items pending higher resolution confirmation. Note, the appearance of number of years 6 here supports resolving the reign length ambiguity flagged on full 11V. The scribal correction incorporating dos likely reflects a corrected total of 5 or 6 years, the historical range commonly cited for Tizoc, 1481-82 to 1486. This is consistent with the manuscript's own count rather than an outside imposition, and worth citing precisely as 6 years per the year count band, with a marginal correction on the prose page. Folio 12 Verso, Ahuitzotl, 8th ruler of Tenochtitlan, in the year 1486, per a scribal correction. In the lordship of Mexico, upon the death of Tizocicatl, Ahuitzotl succeeded to that lordship, identified here as the brother of his predecessor, Tizocicatl. During the time of his reign, he conquered by force of arms 45 towns, as depicted and named successively on the following pages. Ahuitzotl was equal to his brother in valor and deeds of arms. He was, like Tizoc, a great captain, through which he came to attain the title of Axayacatl, meaning great captain, and through that title he came to ascend and succeed to the lordship. The said Ahuitzotl was by nature well inclined and applied to every virtue, and in the course of his life and reign, he kept the republic well governed, and had the customs and laws of his predecessors sustained and observed, from the times of Moctezuma I onward. And when he came to the lordship of Mexico, it had already risen to great majesty, and he held the greater part of this land, New Spain, subject and made vassals, and from those Indian tributaries who paid tribute to the said lordship, as its lord, being powerful and magnanimous, he did great favors to his own people. And he was of a temperate and benign disposition, for which his vassals and captains loved him in the extreme and held him in great reverence. Likewise he had many wives and children in them, as was the custom befitting the lordship, being a person of great state. He was of cheerful disposition, for which reason his vassals continually celebrated him in his life with many and diverse kinds of festivals, and music and songs and instruments, on all the days. As the singers, who in their houses never ceased rehearsing, and musicians, and many instruments of music. The course of his life was 16 years, at the end of which he died and passed from this present life. A scribal correction confirms 16, rather than an earlier struck-through figure of 8 as the valid reign length. Note, the naming of Ahuitzotl as Tizoc's brother here is worth flagging. alongside full 11V's naming of Tizoc as son of Axayacatl. Taken together, these two folios describe 1. Axayacatl, full 9V, as son of Acamapichtli, 2. Tizoc, full 11V, as son of Axayacatl, and 3. Ahuitzotl, this folio as brother of Tizoc. This makes Tizoc and Ahuitzotl both sons of Axayacatl in the manuscript's own account, and grandsons of Acamapichtli. Outside historical sources more commonly hold that Tizoc, Ahuitzotl, and Axayacatl were all brothers, sons of a prince also named Acamapichtli. The discrepancy is worth citing to the manuscript directly, and any harmonization belongs in interpretation. Also worth flagging for the encyclopedia, this is now the second consecutive ruler explicitly recorded as holding the Tlatelolco military rank before ascending to the lordship, following Tizoc on full 11V. Together they establish a clear pattern of the ruling office being recruited from that specific high command rank. And as full 14V below will show, this same pattern continues with Moctezuma II. Folio 13 Recto, Ahuitzotl's Pictorial Conquest page, Part 1. The seated ruler figure at center left is Ahuitzotl, name labeled with the standard honorific form beside a shield and arrows conquest device captioned as Instruments of War. The year count band along the left margin closes with the notation Number of Years 16, Roman numeral XVJ, matching the corrected 16-year reign length stated on the prose folio 12V. This folio and the following, 13V, together depict the roughly 45 towns stated in the full 12V prose introduction, the largest single reign conquest total in the manuscript to date, surpassing Moctezuma I and Axayacatl's 37. Confirmed legible town labels on this folio include Exaico, Tlapan, Melanco, Amoxtlan, Capultan, Tentative, Zaltepec, Cayapan, Tototepec, Xolochuhian, Coscacuatenanco, Itzcoatl, Tentative, Coyucac, Acatepec, Huitzilihuitl, Oquapulco, Tentative Xutonacan, Tentative Apancalecan, Tecpatepec, Tepechiapan, Chimalpopoca, and Xuhotecomoxtlan, Tentative. As with other dense pictorial pages, several first-pass readings remain flagged as open items. Folio 13 Verso, Ahuitzotl's Pictorial Conquest page, Part 2. This folio continues Ahuitzotl's conquest list with a further roughly 22 town glyphs across 5 rows. Legible top row labels include Tecuantepec, Coyolapan, Iztaclaxocan, Tentative, Teocuitlatlan, Tentative, and Huitzilihuitl. Middle and lower rows include Axayacatl, Tentative, Huitzilihuitl, Tentative, Comitlan, Nansenslan, Huipilan, Tentative, Cavualan, Tentative, Itzcoatl, Huitzlan, Xolotlan, Cuauhnacastlan, Macatlan, Ayahuitotl, Cuautlan, Quescuitlacapilan, Tentative, Mapachtepec, Cuaupiloa, Tlacotepec, and Miquetlan. Together with full 13R, the total across the two pictorial folios matches the 45 town count stated in the full 12V prose introduction. Folio 14 Recto, blank leaf, offset impression only. This leaf carries no independently inked content, only a faint offset impression from the facing page. It follows the same structural pattern as full 7R, 9R, and 11R. A blank recto opening a new ruler's section on the facing verso. Folio 14 Verso, Moctezuma II, Xocoyotzin, ninth and final ruler before the Spanish conquest. In the year 1502, corrected in a marginal note from an original 4, in the lordship of Mexico, upon the death of Ahuitzotl, Moctezuma succeeded to that lordship. At the time he succeeded to the said lordship, he was already renowned in Mexico with great majesty and authority. And because he came to that lordship with his great generosity, he made great in the extreme the state and lordship of Mexico, much more than his predecessors had. Moctezuma was the son of Axayacatl, who had been lord of Mexico before him. And first, before entering into the said lordship, he had merits as a valiant man in the wars and captaincies, through which he came to hold the title of Tlacatecatl. In this way he succeeded to the lordship, as stated. And being in the said lordship, he amplified and expanded to the extreme the Mexica Empire, holding sway over all the towns of this land, which gave and paid him great tributes, and beneath him lay much wealth. He was in the extreme feared by his vassals, and correspondingly by his captains and principal men. When none of the great ones treated with him, out of the great respect and awe they held him in, out of fear they did not dare to look him in the face, but kept their eyes lowered to the ground, and their heads humbled and inclined to the ground. And there were many other extreme protocols and ceremonies performed for the great majesty he represented to them, which are not set down here to avoid prolixity. After Moctezuma had succeeded to the lordship, he made conquests of 44 towns, as depicted and named on the following pages, and he subjected them beneath his lordship, an empire, and in recognition of vassalage, throughout the course of his life, they paid him many and great tributes, as further shown by the figures with their explanations. Moctezuma was by his nature wise, an astrologer and philosopher, an astute and general in all arts, both military and in other temporal matters. And through his great gravity and state, his lordship took on the character of an empire in the way his own people revered him with great veneration and awe. In comparison with his ancestors, none came anywhere close to reaching so much state and majesty. Note, this pre-conquest character portrait of Moctezuma II is materially different from the figure most familiar from later Spanish accounts. Here he is described positively and at length: wise, philosophical, astute, a philosopher king surrounded by extreme court protocol, and expressly credited with transforming the Mexica lordship into an empire, and expanding it further than any of his predecessors. This is unusually valuable primary source material, and worth its own citation note in the encyclopedia, an authoritative Mexica informant characterization of the last independent Mexica ruler, recorded within a generation of his death, before the later colonial narrative had fully hardened. Also flagged, Moctezuma II is now the third consecutive ruler, following Tizoc and Ahuitzotl, explicitly recorded as having held the Tlatelolco military rank before ascending to the lordship. This is a strong, citation-worthy pattern from the primary source itself. The highest office was recruited from a specific military command over 3 successive successions. The reign-length figure for Moctezuma II is not fully stated on this folio. The passage ends before the standard X years, at the end of which he died, formulation seen for earlier rulers. This may reflect that Moctezuma II's death, during the Spanish conquest in 1520, fell outside the manuscript's tidy ruler-by-ruler frame, and is handled differently in later folios, flagged for follow-up. Folio 15, Recto Moctezuma II's reign in prose, laws, family, governance, the arrival of Cortés, his death, and the fall of Mexico. The laws and ordinances of his predecessors, from the time of Huitzilihuitl Moctezuma I, up until his own time, he commanded to be guarded and fulfilled in their entirety, with much zeal, and because he was a man so wise by his good nature, he ordered and composed further ordinances and laws, those which seemed to him lacking in the completeness of the earlier ones, without repealing any, all for the benefit and good governance of his republic and vassals. He was inclined to keep many houses of women, daughters of the lords of his vassals and confederates, and by them he had many children. And keeping so many wives was more to display great magnificence and stature, for by this they held him in great state. Among these women, the daughters of the greatest lords and figures of authority, he took as legitimate wives according to their rites and ceremonies, and these he kept within his palace and lodgings. The sons born of them were regarded as more legitimate than those born of the other wives. The rules by which he governed his relations with them and the way he conducted himself among them is a long history to tell, and being that this is a summary account, its narration is set aside. The quantity, value, and number of tributes that his vassals paid him will be seen and understood in what follows, as depicted in the figures with their explanations, of the goods that were paid to him as tribute. And he was in the extreme, thorough in the tributes that were paid to him, for by him it was ordered that they always be completely delivered, and for this he had his calpixques, tribute stewards, and appointed officers placed in all the towns of his vassals, as a manner of governors who governed them and commanded them. And they were much feared, and no one dared to exceed his will. He commanded that his orders be entirely observed and complied with. And he was insufferable in the execution and punishment of rebels. In the 16th year of Moctezuma's lordship, the Mexica had news of certain Spanish discoverers of this New Spain, regarding whom, at the end of 11 months, they had knowledge, and found to be true, that the coming and armada of the Spaniards was to gain and conquer this land. And some time before, they had certainty of it. At the end of the 11 months, came the arrival at the port of this New Spain of Don Fernando Cortés, Marqués del Valle. This was in the 17th year of Moctezuma's lordship, and in the 18th year of the lordship, Moctezuma reached the end of his course, in which he died and passed from this present life. At the time Moctezuma took charge of the said lordship, he was a man of about 35 years, more or less, so that at the time of his end and death he reached the age of 53 years. Then, in the year following the death of Moctezuma, the city of Mexico and other neighboring towns of the surrounding region were won and pacified by the Marqués del Valle and his consorts. And in this way, New Spain was won and pacified. Note, this folio resolves several open questions from the earlier prose entry, fol 14v, about Moctezuma II. The reign length is confirmed as 18 years, 1502 to 1520, consistent with his death during the Spanish conquest. His age at succession is given as about 35, placing his birth around 1467. His age at death is stated as 53, again consistent with 1467 plus 53 is approximately 1520. The manuscript names Cortés directly as Don Fernando Cortés, Marqués del Valle, using the title he was later granted, 1529, which incidentally dates the composition of this passage to after 1529. Also worth flagging for the encyclopedia, this folio is where the Codex explicitly introduces the Calpixe institution, the tribute stewards, provincial governors appointed by Moctezuma II to collect tribute from the empire's subject towns. This is the direct textual bridge into Part 2 of the manuscript, the tribute lists, which will systematically document what each of those Calpixe provinces paid. Folio 15 verso, Moctezuma II's pictorial conquest page, and the closing panel of Part 1. The seated figure at center left is Moctezuma II, name labeled Motecuma, paired with the shield and arrows conquest device captioned Instruments of War. The year count band along the left margin closes with the notation number of years XVI, J, i.e. 17 or 18, consistent with the 18-year reign given in the full 15R prose. Legible town labels on this folio include Axayacatl, Xozolan, Nochistlan, Tecutepec, Tlanetzlan, tentative, Huilotepec, Ixpatepec, Ixtactlalocan, tentative, Chichihualtatacala, tentative, Tecoxic, Tlachinolticpac, tentative, Zoconochco, Cinquantlan, tentative, Huitztlan, and Piastlan, tentative. Together with the further conquered town glyphs continuing onto full 16R and 16V, see below. These make up the 44 town total stated in the full 14V prose introduction. The closing panel, in the lower left corner of this folio, distinct from the town glyph rows above it, sits a small framed panel that formally closes Part 1 of the manuscript. It carries two captions in the scribe's hand, Fin y Pacificación, End and Pacification, and Muerte de Moctezuma, Death of Moctezuma, with a vertical caption reading Conquistadores, Conquerors alongside. A simple step temple glyph and 3 dots complete the panel, a minimal formal marker for the closure of the historical section, using the same visual vocabulary, temple glyph, count dots, that the rest of Part 1 has used throughout. Note, the closing panel is a materially important structural feature and worth its own citation. It marks the manuscript's explicit break between Part 1, the ruler-by-ruler historical chronicle, and what follows, the tribute lists organized by Calpixe province, and it does so in the Codex's own visual vocabulary rather than in Spanish gloss alone. The scribe's use of the word pacificación rather than conquista for the Spanish takeover is a specifically colonial-era euphemism worth noting. Pacification framed conquest as the restoration of order. and this term choice reveals the perspective of the Spanish scribe, half of the manuscript's dual authorship. Folio 16 Recto, Moctezuma II's conquered towns continued. This folio continues the Moctezuma II conquered town rows from full 15v, with roughly 20 additional town glyphs across 5 rows. Legible top row labels include Molango, tentative, Zacuantepec, tentative, Pipioltepec, and Huitzilihuitl, tentative. Middle row labels include Tecpatlan, Amaxtlan, Caltepec, Ixpatepec, tentative, the same place name appears earlier, Texocinco, Tecozaltlan, tentative, Teotihuacan, and Zacatepec. Lower row labels include Tlatelolco, Malinaltepec, Quimichtepec, Ixitlan, tentative, Huaycpantepec, tentative, Sencontepec, tentative, Quetzaltepec, Huitzcomaixtlahuaca, tentative, and Huitzolotlan. As with other dense pictorial pages, several readings remain first pass and are flagged as open items pending higher resolution confirmation. Folio 16 Verso, Moctezuma II's conquered towns, concluded. A short, sparse folio, only 2 rows of 4 town glyphs each, with the rest of the page blank. This concludes the Moctezuma II conquered town enumeration. Legible labels. Top row, Zalapan, Zaltianquixco, tentative, Xolochiuyan, Atepec. Bottom row, Mictlan, Huitzilihuitl, tentative, Tlatelolco, Chimalpopoca, tentative. Note: the sparseness of this folio is a structural signal. There is no need to fill it, because Part 1's closing panel has already been placed on full 15v. What appears here on 16v is simply the overflow of Moctezuma II's 44-town conquest tally beyond the closing panel's page. The blank lower 2/3 leaves visual space between Part 1's substantive content and the transitional structures that follow. Folio 17 Recto, blank leaf, offset impression only. This leaf carries no independently inked content, only a faint offset impression from the facing page. Its position, immediately after the sparse Moctezuma II conclusion, and immediately before the new structure material on full 17v, marks the formal break between Part 1, the historical chronicle, and the transitional governors and provinces material that opens Part 2. Folio 17 Verso, transition to Part 2, the governors of the empire's subject provinces. This folio breaks entirely with the previous 15 folios' visual format. Instead of a ruler figure paired with conquered town glyphs, it shows a series of paired town glyphs and human head figures, each head labeled with variants of Acamapichtli, gobernador, Axayacatl, governor, i.e., an official of the Axayacatl military rank serving as governor, or Tenochtitlan, gobernador, Axayacatl, governor, the other high military office. Each governor is grouped with a set of towns under his jurisdiction. Legible town labels on this folio include Tlatelolco, Cuautacco, Mixcoatl, Zompanco, Zaltocan, Axayacatl, Ixteocan, Acolhuacan, Coatlan, Huitzoctl, Coatzayancan, tentative, Cocolan, Pochtepec, Acolnahuac, Coaxotlan, tentative, Ixtacalco, and Chalcotenco, tentative. The tributary region governor labels appear consistently between the paired town glyphs, showing that a single Axayacatl governor typically oversaw multiple towns in a district. Note: this folio is functionally the bridge between Part 1 and Part 2. Part 1 has just closed with the death of Moctezuma II and the Spanish pacification, full 15v. What this folio does is document the imperial administrative structure at the moment of the Spanish conquest, how the empire's tribute-collecting provinces were organized, and by whom they were governed. This provides a fourth explicit primary source instance of the Axayacatl military rank being tied to civil administration, following Tizoc, Ahuitzotl, and Moctezuma II themselves ascending through it, and it now shows the same rank being held simultaneously by regional governors under Moctezuma II. In other words, the Axayacatl rank served both as the recruitment pool for the imperial office itself and as the standard administrative post for holding subject provinces. That is a citation-worthy institutional pattern grounded directly in the primary source. The absence of Spanish prose commentary on this folio, only pictorial labels, is itself worth noting. Part 1's prose folios, odd-numbered rulers' verso pages, systematically explained each reign. This folio opens the Codex's second visual system, which the prose-heavy Part 2 folios will then formalize as tribute province lists. Folio 18 recto, the governors continued, and the explicit end of Part 1. This folio continues the imperial governors listing from full 17v, with additional paired town glyph and head figure groupings, each governor labeled with a variant of Tlacatecatl Gobernador or Tlacochtecatl Gobernador. Legible town labels on this folio include Atotonilco, Cuauhnahuac, now a fourth appearance across the manuscript, Xoconoco, Tepecuacuilco, Atlan, tentative, and Tenochtitlan, tentative. An explanatory prose block in the lower half of the page glosses both full 17v and this folio together. The towns depicted and named on this page and the one before were governed by the caciques and principal men of Mexico, appointed by the lords of Mexico for the protection and good government of the natives, and so that they should entirely be in charge of collecting and ordering to be collected the many tributes which they were obligated to give and pay to the lordship of Mexico, and for the security of those towns so that they should not rebel. At the very bottom of the folio, centered and clearly written, is the Codex's own explicit closure of the historical section. Fin de la partida primera de esta historia. End of the first part of this history. Note, this resolves the structural question of where exactly Part 1 ends. It is not at the closing panel on full 15v, which marks the end of Moctezuma II's reign specifically, and it is not at the sparse Moctezuma II overflow on 16v, but here on 18r, after the two folio governors listing that closes with an explicit fin de la partida primera. The manuscript treats the governors listing as belonging to Part 1, as the institutional coda to the ruler-by-ruler chronicle, rather than as an introduction to Part 2. Worth preserving precisely, the primary source itself defines its own section boundaries. Part 2. The tribute lists folios 18v to 55v. Part 2 systematically documents the goods that each of the empire's subject provinces paid in tribute to Tenochtitlan. The most economically and geographically detailed portion of the Codex, and the section most commonly consulted for its evidence of Mexica trade, textile production, foodstuffs, arms manufacture, and imperial administration. Each province is presented in a standard triple format, one prose folio itemizing the tribute, followed by one or two pictorial folios showing the province's constituent towns along the left margin and the tribute goods themselves in the main field, with icons indicating tribute frequency. Folio 18 verso opening of Part 2, the Tribute of Tlatelolco. This folio opens with the manuscript's own title header, La segunda parte de la historia, the second part of the history. The first tribute entry documents not one of the empire's regular subject provinces, but Tlatelolco specifically, treated as a special case in keeping with its status as Tenochtitlan's sister city on the same island. On the following pages are depicted and titled the things and kinds of goods that the people of Tlatelolco, which at present they call Santiago, paid in tribute to the lordship of Mexico. And the said tribute, from here, is the following. They had as tribute always to repair the temple called Huitzilihuitl. Item, 40 large baskets of the size of a half fanega of cacao ground with maize flour, which they called cacahuapinoli, in which each basket held 1,800 cacao beans. Item, another 40 baskets of chianpinoli, chia seed flour. Item, 800 loads of large mantles. Item, 80 pieces of arms of rich feathers, and another 80 shields of the same rich feathers of the various colors depicted. All of which, the said arms and shields, were given as tribute every 80 days, and the gold arms and shields were given as tribute once every year. This tribute began in the time of Cuauhtlatoa and Moquihuix, who were lords of Tlatelolco. The lords of Mexico who first initiated Tlatelolco's tribute obligation, acknowledging vassalage, were Itzcoatl and Axayacatl. Note, 3 items on this folio are worth flagging for the encyclopedia. 1. The parenthetical, which at present they call Santiago, dates the passage's composition to after 1536, when the Franciscans established the Colegio de Santa Cruz de Santiago Tlatelolco, a firm terminus post quem for Part 2's composition, useful for the manuscript's chronology, alongside the Marquez del Valle reference on fol 15R, post 1529. 2. The Tlatelolco tribute begins with a labor obligation, temple upkeep, rather than goods, a distinct kind of tribute worth citing separately. The list of exactly which Mexica rulers initiated the tribute, Itzcoatl and Axayacatl, matches directly to fol 6R, where Tlatelolco appears in Itzcoatl's conquest list, represented uniquely by its ruler Cuauhtlatoani rather than a plain town glyph, and to fol 9V to 10R, where Axayacatl's conquest of Tlatelolco under Moquihuix is narrated in detail. Part 2's opening tribute entry therefore cross-references directly to 2 earlier Part 1 folios. The codex is internally consistent across its own structural break. Folio 19 Recto, the tribute of Tlatelolco, pictorial. This is the pictorial counterpart to the fol 18V prose entry. The upper portion shows the tribute goods themselves, a stepped temple glyph labeled Huitzilihuitl, the temple whose maintenance formed part of the tribute, followed by baskets captioned 20 cestos de cacao molido, 20 baskets of ground cacao, and 20 cestos de pinol, 20 baskets of pinol, matching the double 40 items in the prose. 2 flag and flower symbols above the baskets are the codex's iconographic markers, indicating the tribute was paid twice per year. In the mid-register, 2 labeled cloth bundle icons captioned 400 mantas grandes, 400 large mantles, each totaling 800 as in the prose. Below that, 2 feathered warrior costumes, one yellow and white, one striped, each labeled 40 piezas de armas de esta divisa, 40 pieces of arms of this device, paired with matching shields captioned 40 rodelas de esta divisa, totaling the 80 pieces of arms and 80 shields stated in the prose. The 1 costume per color pattern convention is worth noting. Each depicted device stands for a series of identical objects, not one physical item. A caption block explains the 4 small square day count symbols. These 4, like flowers, signify 60 days each flower 60 days, on which the people of Tlatelolco presented their tribute of the things depicted and named on this page. The lower portion identifies the specific rulers involved on both sides. On the left, a cactus on stone glyph labeled Tenochtitlan, paired with 2 ruler heads, Itzcoatl and Axayacatl, matching the prose statement of which Mexica rulers initiated the tribute. On the right, a mound shape labeled Tlatelolco, paired with 2 ruler heads, Cuauhtlatoani and Moquihuix, the Tlatelolco rulers named in the prose. This visual pairing is one of the codex's clearest formal statements of the 2-city relationship immediately prior to the 1473 conquest. Folio 19 Verso, the tribute of the Petlacalco province, prose. This folio opens the first of the codex's formal tribute provinces, the district administered by an officer titled Petlacalcatl, head of the Wickerbox store, the imperial chief treasury officer. This is distinct from the Tlatelolco entry above, which was a special case. The Petlacalco province opens the standard province-by-province enumeration that will continue through fol 55V. The towns depicted on the 2 following pages are, according to their titles, named individually, administered under a Mexica officer who is called Petlacalcatl, who is like a chief steward and has charge of receiving and collecting the tributes that the said towns paid in tribute to the lordship of Mexico. The things and kinds of goods which the said towns paid in tribute are the following: 1,400 loads of large mantles, 2,000 rich, fine little mantles, mantillas, of the colors depicted, 400 loads of loincloths, matztles, that serve as waistcloths, 400 loads of women's shifts, huipiles, and skirts, naguas. All of the above was paid as tribute, every 80 days. Item, more, they paid in tribute some number of pieces of arms of rich feathers, and as many shields of the colors and devices depicted. Item, more, they paid in tribute 60 pieces of arms of ordinary feathers, and as many shields of the colors and devices depicted. Item, more, they paid in tribute one storehouse, troye of beans, another storehouse of chia, another storehouse of maize, and another storehouse of huitzilihuitl, which is the seed of the bledo, amaranth, which, the said arms and shields, and the storehouses of beans and other seeds, the said towns paid and tributed once every year. This establishes the standard tribute format for the rest of Part 2. Textiles and worked cloth are paid on the 80-day cycle, a Mexica cycle roughly matching 4 20-day months, while durable goods, feather costume arms and shields, and staple food storehouses are paid on the annual cycle. This distinction is worth preserving precisely. The Codex distinguishes tribute types by both category and frequency, and any encyclopedia entry on Mexica tribute should cite this dual cycle from the primary source, rather than flattening it to annual tribute. Also worth flagging, the manuscript preserves the specific unit vocabulary in Nahuatl, Maxtlis, Huipiles, Naguas, Troje, Huautli, rather than fully translating to Spanish equivalents. This is characteristic of the Codex's mixed vocabulary Spanish and reflects the real trained vocabulary of colonial-era New Spain. Preserving these terms directly in the English translation is consistent with the encyclopedia's source integrity standard. Folio 20 Recto, the tribute of the Petlacalco province, pictorial Part 1. This folio and the next, 20v, together depict pictorially the tribute enumerated in the folio 19v prose. The layout follows the manuscript's standard tribute list format. Subject towns are named down the left margin, each with its glyph, and the tribute goods themselves are depicted in the main field to the right, with quantity numerals and category labels. Subject towns depicted on this folio, in the left column top to bottom: Petlacalco, the district's namesake; Zaxalpan, Yopico, Tepetlacalco, Tecoloapan, Tepechpan, Tequamecan, Huitzilihuitl, Colhuacan, Cocotlan, Tepepolan, tentative, Iztac partial, and Ocaxpan tentative. Additional towns continue on folio 20v below. Tribute goods depicted upper portion, stacked bundles labeled 400 cargas de mantas grandes, 400 loads of large mantles, 4 such bundles, totaling the 1,400 plus figure in the prose, matching the total of 1,400, as loads are numbered with Roman numeral captions above each. A labeled cloth captioned, Carga cotton mantles ricas, for rich fine cotton mantles, and additional cloth bundle stacks, captioned as loincloths and huipiles, matching the 4 textile categories in the prose. In the mid-register, 2 matched pairs of warrior costumes with shields, a striped white and black costume with a yellow spiral motif shield, a yellow and black costume with a stepped frame shield, each labeled with quantity notations. In the lower register, 3 additional feathered costume figures with matching shields, representing the 60 pieces of ordinary feather arms called out in the prose. Note on convention. As with the Tlatelolco pictorial page, each depicted costume and shield pair stands for a batch of physically identical items, not one artifact. The number is given in the caption. This is worth preserving in transcription. Attempts to inventory the Codex's tribute costumes by counting each depicted item would undercount actual tribute quantities dramatically. The correct reading is icon plus caption equals category and quantity, not one per image. Folio 20 Verso, the tribute of the Petlacalco province, pictorial Part 2. This folio continues the pictorial tribute enumeration of the Petlacalco province from folio 20R. Additional subject towns depicted in the left column: Huitzilihuitl, now a 5th appearance across the manuscript; Tezontepac, Mixquic, 4th appearance; Oquapanco, tentative; Tzompaquetzalpotipla, tentative; Xico, Toyacinco, tentative; Tecalco, Flaquisiaco, tentative; and Tenochtitlan, tentative. Together with the towns on Fol 20R, the Petlacalco district contains approximately 26 subject towns. Tribute goods depicted include additional feathered warrior costumes, 1 green and yellow spiral motif costume with a gold spiral shield, one red plume costume with a matching red and blue band shield, and smaller striped and coyote motif costume pairs, documenting the annual arms tribute of the 60 ordinary feather pieces. In the lower register, 2 storehouse troje glyphs labeled with their grain contents. One captioned, Troxe de frijoles y de chía y de sagüe, y otros, storehouse of beans and chia and other seeds, and another, Troxe de maíz y de huautli, de semilla de bledos, storehouse of maize and huautli, seed of the amaranth. Matching the 4 staple food storehouses stated in the prose: beans, chia, maize, huautli. Note, the reappearance of Cuitlahuac and Mixquic in this district is worth citing. Both were among the 4 lake towns first conquered by Acamapichtli, Fol 2v, then reconquered under Itzcoatl, Fol 6r. Their appearance here as members of the Petlacalco tribute district, roughly a century after their initial conquest, documents that the imperial administrative structure was in place well before the Codex was composed. The towns had transitioned from a rebellion and reconquest cycle under the early rulers to settled tribute status by Moctezuma II's time. The empire's institutional continuity is documented across 7 separate folios: 2v, 5r, 6r, 7v, 19v, 20r, 20v, tracking these same towns. Document status, current coverage, folios 1r through 20v, Part 1 complete, Part 2 opened, first 2 tribute entries done. Confirmed findings worth flagging for the encyclopedia. The scribe's own margin interlinear corrections on fols 3r, 4r, and 5r form an internally consistent chronology. Acamapichtli d. 1398. Huitzilihuitl succeeds 1398, reigns 21 years. Chimalpopoca succeeds 1417, arithmetic prediction 1419, a close match. Fol 4v5r document a named armed conflict with Chalco and 5 Mexica casualties during Chimalpopoca's reign. A military setback, not a conquest, and distinct from the one-sided conquest lists on other rulers' pages. The manuscript does not state Chimalpopoca's own cause of death. This should not be conflated with the Chalco conflict without further source confirmation. Fol 5v records Itzcoatl's conquest of Azcapotzalco, the historical turning point traditionally credited with beginning Tenochtitlan's rise to power. Alongside Tlacopan's appearance in the same conquest list, despite Tlacopan's later role as a Triple Alliance partner rather than a subject state. Flagged for cross-reference. Fol 6r shows Mixquic, Cuitlahuac, Xochimilco, and Chalco being reconquered under Itzcoatl. The same 4 towns first subjugated under Acamapichtli, Fol 2v, with Chalco specifically being the town that rebelled under Chimalpopoca. Fols 4v5r. This is a 4-folio, 3-reign continuity thread worth its own citation note. Fol 6r also names Tlatelolco's own ruler, Cuauhtlatoani, rather than using a generic town glyph. A distinction preserved precisely rather than flattened. Fol 6v's stated total of 24 towns for Itzcoatl matches exactly the combined count from Fols 5v and 6r. Cross-confirming both pages were transcribed correctly as a set. A 4th consecutive ruler transition date checks out arithmetically. Chimalpopoca succeeds 1417, reigns 10 years. Itzcoatl succeeds 1427, exactly as stated. Itzcoatl's own 13-year reign predicts the next succession around 1440. Fol 8v confirms a 5th consecutive ruler transition match. Itzcoatl succeeds 1427, reigns 13 years. Moctezuma I succeeds 1440, exactly as stated. His stated 29-year reign predicts a death around 1469, matching the commonly cited external historical date for Moctezuma I, Iluikamina. Fol 7r is confirmed blank. Only a faint offset impression from the facing page's pigment, not an independently inked leaf. Documented rather than left as an unexplained gap. Fol 8v contains a colonial-era Spanish generalization about indigenous peoples and drunkenness, translated faithfully with an editorial note, per the encyclopedia's source criticism standard. Chalco and Cuernavaca Each appear a third time in the conquest lists. Full 7v under Moctezuma I, having previously been conquered under Acamapichtli, full 2v, and reconquered under Itzcoatl, full 6r. An unusually persistent pattern of rebellion and reconquest worth its own cross-reference note in the encyclopedia. Sixth consecutive ruler transition match. Moctezuma I succeeds 1440, reigns 29 years. Axayacatl succeeds 1469, per interlinear correction, exactly as stated. His 12-year reign then predicts Tizoc's succession around 1481, and Tizoc's stated succession year is 1482, a one-year drift that is either an interpretive detail in the year the succession took effect versus in the year the previous ruler died, or a small internal inconsistency, noted rather than smoothed over. Full 10r contains a rare named ruler death depiction, Moctezuma of Tlatelolco shown falling headfirst from the Tlatelolco temple, the pictorial counterpart to the 1473 Tenochtitlan-Tlatelolco War narrated on full 9v, one of only a handful of individual named death images in the Codex's historical section. Full 11v names Tizoc as a son of Axayacatl, which differs from the common outside historical account of Tizoc as Axayacatl's brother. The primary source's own reading is cited faithfully. Any harmonization belongs in interpretation, not transcription. Full 11v also records that Tizoc held the military rank of Axayacatl before his elevation to the lordship, a specific institutional detail about how the ruling office was recruited from the senior military commands. Fulls 9r and 11r are confirmed blank leaves, with facing page offset only, fitting the same structural pattern as full 7r. Each new ruler section opens with a blank recto, followed by prose introduction on the verso, from Moctezuma I onward. Full 14r continues this pattern. Full 12r resolves Tizoc's reign length ambiguity. The year count band closes at 6 years, consistent with the scribal correction on full 11v that incorporated dos. Full 12v confirms Ahuitzotl succeeded Tizoc in 1486, reigned 16 years, and had 45 conquests, the largest reign conquest total in the manuscript. It also explicitly names Ahuitzotl as Tizoc's brother, meaning the primary source's own kinship account has both Tizoc and Ahuitzotl as sons of Axayacatl. Outside sources more commonly hold all three, Axayacatl, Tizoc, Ahuitzotl, as brothers, sons of Tezozomoc. The discrepancy is worth citing to the manuscript directly. 3 consecutive rulers, Tizoc, full 11v, Ahuitzotl, full 12v, and Moctezuma II, full 14v, are explicitly recorded as having held the military rank of Axayacatl before ascending to the lordship. This is a strong, citation-worthy pattern from the primary source itself. The highest office was recruited from a specific senior military command over 3 successive successions. Full 14v gives an unusually rich pre-conquest character portrait of Moctezuma II Xocoyotzin, wise, an astrologer and philosopher, astute in all arts, military and temporal, credited with expanding the Mexico lordship into an empire greater than any predecessors. This positive characterization, recorded within a generation of his death, contrasts sharply with the wavering figure of later Spanish accounts. Materially valuable primary source material for the encyclopedia. Full 14v also explicitly documents the court protocol practice of Moctezuma II's vassals not looking him in the face, but keeping eyes lowered and heads bowed. One of the Codex's few explicit ethnographic details about the imperial court, embedded in the historical section rather than reserved for Part 3. 7th consecutive ruler transition match. Ahuitzotl succeeds Tizoc in 1486. Tizoc a -5 to 6 years plus prior 1481-82 succession. Moctezuma II succeeds Ahuitzotl in 1502. Ahuitzotl 1486 plus 16 equals 1502. Exact match. 9th ruler chronology holds together within the manuscript's own arithmetic. Full 15r closes the Moctezuma II reign with rare specificity. He succeeded at 35, ruled 18 years, 1502 to 1520, and died at 53. Cortés is named directly as Don Fernando Cortés, Marqués del Valle. The Marqués title, granted 1529, dates the passage's composition to after 1529. Fol 15R also introduces the Acamapichtli institution, the tribute stewards appointed by Moctezuma II to collect tribute from subject towns, forming the direct textual bridge into Part 2 of the manuscript. Fol 15V contains the formal closing panel of Part 1, two captions reading Fin y Pacificación and Muerte de Moctezuma, with a vertical conquistadores label. The Codex marks its own structural break rather than doing so silently. The scribe's choice of pacificación rather than conquista for the Spanish takeover is a colonial-era euphemism revealing the Spanish scribe half of the manuscript's perspective. Fol 17V documents the imperial administrative structure at the moment of the Spanish conquest. Subject towns are grouped under Tlatelolco and Petlacalco governors, showing the same Tlatelolco military rank noted earlier. Tizoc, Ahuitzotl, Moctezuma II ascending through it, was also the standard post for holding subject provinces. That is a fourth citation of this rank's dual role: recruitment pool for the ruling office and standard administrative post for the empire's provinces. 18R contains the Codex's own explicit closing caption for Part 1, Fin de la partida primera de esta historia. The manuscript defines its own section boundary rather than leaving it implicit. The governor's listing, 17V to 18R, is included in Part 1 as its institutional coda, not as introduction to Part 2. Fol 18V opens Part 2 with the title La Segunda Parte de la Historia, then documents Tlatelolco's tribute as a special case first entry before the standard 38-province enumeration begins. The reference to Tlatelolco, which at present they call Santiago, dates the passage's composition to after 1536. Founding of Santa Cruz de Santiago Tlatelolco, giving Part 2 a firm terminus post quem. Fol 19V establishes the standard tribute list format and vocabulary, textiles and worked cloth on the 80-day cycle, feathered arms and staple food storehouses on the annual cycle. This distinction is preserved in every following tribute province and should be cited from the primary source rather than flattened. 19V also introduces the Petlacalco office, the imperial chief steward, head of the treasury, as the officer responsible for the first formal tribute district, directly following the Acamapichtli mention on Fol 15R. Together, these two folios document the empire's tribute administration hierarchy: rulers, Acamapichtli regional tribute stewards, Petlacalco chief treasury officer. A new continuity thread confirmed. Quitlahuac and Mizquic, Acamapichtli's original conquests Fol 2V, appear as members of the Petlacalco tribute district on Fols 20R to 20V, documented across 7 separate folios: 2V, 5R, 6R, 7V, 19V, 20R, 20V, tracking these same towns from first conquest under Acamapichtli in the 1370s to settled tribute status under Moctezuma II, c. 1519. Open items, pending higher resolution or follow-up review. 3 of the 10 founding leaders' names on Fol 1R-2R remain unconfirmed. Full glyph-by-glyph transliteration of the year count band on Fol 1V is not yet done. 1 conquered town label on Fol 3V, tentatively Tuladsingo, needs a higher resolution recheck. 2 town labels on Fol 5V, Teocalhuacan, Cuauhtacan, Tecpan, are tentative and need a higher resolution recheck. The lower 3 rows of town labels on Fol 6R, roughly 9 towns, are not yet transcribed with confidence and need a full high-resolution pass. 1 town label on Fol 7V, Malinaltepec, is tentative. Roughly a dozen town labels across Fol 8R's dense 6-row layout are first-pass readings and need a full high-resolution confirmation pass. Similarly, roughly a dozen town labels across Fol 10V's dense 6-row layout are first-pass readings and need a full high-resolution confirmation pass. Several town labels on Fol 10R, Telacatepec, Cuauhpanahuayan, are tentative. Tizoc's exact reign length figure on full 11V, with a scribal correction incorporating DOS, is not fully legible in this pass, and needs a recheck. Commonly cited outside sources give either 4 or 5 years. Roughly 24 town labels across fulls 12R, 13R, and 13V are first-pass readings for a densely packed pictorial run, and need a full high-resolution confirmation pass. Full 14V's prose introduction to Moctezuma II ends without stating a reign-length figure. May reflect that his death during the Spanish conquest, 1520, fell outside the manuscript's usual reign-by-reign frame. Whether the reign length appears elsewhere in the manuscript should be checked, as later folios are transcribed. Resolved. Full 15R, 18 years, 1502 to 1520. Approximately 36 town labels across fulls 15V, 16R, 16V, and 17V are first-pass readings and need a full high-resolution confirmation pass. Several town labels on fulls 18R, 20R, and 20V are tentative first-pass readings and need higher resolution confirmation. Next batch, folios 21R to 23V, covering the next 2 tribute provinces, which will follow the same prose plus pictorial format as the Petlacalco district. Given the standardized structure of the tribute lists, batches from here can cover multiple provinces per session efficiently.